Welcome to Teaching History, Elementary Edition, Part 4, Greece. I'm Professor Bob, and Greece is a lot of fun. There's a lot of things you can do with Greece, but like Mesopotamia, there's still some fighting going on. And it's pretty easy to deal with that. But it is a very large topic. And one of the things about it needs to be broken up into segments. Now, in most cases, what I did, most people would not do. I have a significant background in the Bronze Age of ancient Greece, which is the period of, also known as the Homeric Age, which would be Troy, Mycenae, the Minoan civilization, which is why I have the Sea Peoples tour shirt on. The people who supposedly destroyed the Bronze Age. That's for the high school and college section at another time. But we're going to be looking at it in different segments. Normally, when I teach Greek history, whether it was in high school or in college, we did the Homeric Age, we did the Classical Age, which is the period where you have Athens versus Sparta, and the differences between those two and the different types of governments, and the Persian War. And then you would get to the Peloponnesian War, the rise of Macedonia, and of course ultimately Alexander the Great. So there's a lot you can do. You can do stuff with the philosophers, you have mythology, you can spend the whole time on mythology, you can do it on statuary, all sorts of different things. But I've decided for you to do 3 segments on Greece. So this is really the Bronze Age section. And then I will do a section on the classical period. And then I will do one on Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great is probably the most difficult because it's a conquest. And he has very good press, fortunately. But once you get older, you realize that you don't defeat countries without tremendous casualties. And he, of course, has significant issues with some of his fellow commanders and all sorts of different things. We're not even touching on the part about son of Zeus. So we'll deal with that when we get to Alexander. So we're looking at the Bronze Age. Now, one of the things that I have a real expertise in, I've been very fortunate. Sherry and I, our traveling professors, have done shows on walking tours of Troy, of Mycenae, of Knossos, and we've been on the island of Santorini and seen the Minoan city that was buried there. So we have a tremendous amount of material. And one of the things, if you remember the travel book, Emma is very familiar with those trips because she has pictures of us wandering around the islands and doing different things. So it was easy to do a short segment on Knossos, talk about the early Minoans and their mythology, and then go on to Santorini and talk about what may have destroyed the civilization. And of course, at this time, which is 2021, there's been the volcanic eruption on Iceland, or probably the most watched volcanic eruption in all of history. And so she has seen that. So we could talk about a volcano and show that one and talk about different versions of it. So it was easy to do. Then, of course, there's the Mycenaeans, which are the Greeks from Mycenae, Agamemnon's city, the leader of the Greek coalition against Troy in the Trojan War. Well, one of the assignments we had, she loved excavating. And I think I bought every excavation thing you could get your hands on. But there was one for this period. And when you excavated it, you ended up with a little gold plate of Agamemnon's face, which is a replica, a miniature plastic replica of the mask that was found by Schliemann when Mycenae was excavated. Plus some of the statues of the gods and goddesses that we could play with and deal with a little bit later on. And then, of course, we went to Troy. And we talked about the Trojan War, but we did it from a mythological standpoint. You know, the Iliad and the Odyssey, great literature. I showed her the different books. But I had something special here. Not everybody has this. You have to be ancient in order to have one of these. When I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, I loved comic books. It's just a shame that my parents didn't deem them worthy to be boxed and shipped when we moved to southern Missouri when my dad retired. I could keep some of them, but I can't look at a guidebook anymore. I had the #1 Fantastic Four, etc., and so on. But I kept all my classic illustrateds. These are wonderful comic books, wonderfully illustrated, that gave you the gist of the piece of literature. So if you could look at that and understand what was going on. And of course, many times in elementary school, my story or my report on a book was from the classic illustrated. But inside of those, they had all sorts of insight. Well, they have one on, or had one on the Iliad. And I still have it. As a matter of fact, in my college classes, I've scanned it, put it up on the website, so that if they've never read it, they could at least refresh their minds as to what was going on. So she was also able to deal with that. And of course, the nice thing about the Trojan War is you have the gods dividing themselves up on each side. So you get to talk about mythology. With the Minoans, you get to talk about mythology. The Minotaur. You get the flying too close to the sun with Icarus because they were trying to escape the palace. There's all sorts of things that you can do with that. So there was excavations. Her project, her art project, other than excavation, was to go and do her wall again, and this time put an island, which was to be Santorini, and put a volcano on it, and then draw the ships and do some other things. And when we would get to a certain point, she would then paint it so that it was exploding. And then we would go on next to do some of the artwork. She put some artwork of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans there. And then we looked at the gold treasure that was found by Schliemann and talked about a variety of things. So we reinforced archaeology once again. We talked about finding things that no one had ever found before. We did the archaeological piece. And of course, one of the fun things about the archaeological piece is Greece, normally when they excavate a site, if the buildings aren't erected, they don't erect them. They leave them as is. Well, Crete was excavated by Arthur Evans at a time when archaeology was in its early period. And he came to the conclusion that if you built reproductions that were accurate, people would come. And they did. And they still do. The problem is his reconstructions need to be repaired now, and the budget for repairing them and continuing the archaeological dig has issues. But when you go to Knossos, you can really get a view of what it was like. And so we took a short tour so we could see all of these things. So a lot of this time period were visuals of Nani and Bob, as she calls us, walking through the site and her asking questions and doing other things. So that's one of the things that we went through. And I'm torn as to what to give you for an example of the PowerPoint. And I think what I'm going to do the Trojan section, because that will give you some background, because it's something you may be interested yourself to find out. And if you are interested, I have a lot of other videos on Troy and the Trojan War. So we do the Bronze Age first. That's what we're going to check. And there were 4 shows for the Bronze Age. And then the next show will be on the classical era, which is Athens and Sparta. And we'll be going to Athens and Corinth and Delphi and talking more about the mythology. Of course, you can watch the video from Disney on Hercules. It's not actually accurate, but you get an idea to see what the gods are. I also suggested Aesop's Fables from the Bullwinkle and Rocky show, which you can find on YouTube. And they would have fractured fables, I think is what they were called. But we talked about Aesop in the next section and actually read some. The other thing that we did, this is Greece. And Sherry and I have been to Greece 4 times. We love it. I proposed there. We bought our wedding rings on Santorini. I was going to propose in Egypt, but we never got to Egypt. So I fortunately had done that in Athens at the foot of the Acropolis. And of course, there's a variety of books that we'll look at. So I will go on to my desk and pick up a couple of these items, and then we'll go through the walkthrough of the Trojan PowerPoint presentation that we covered. And it's always a little easier at the desk. But there's not a whole lot to show you here because I'm going to put that mostly in the PowerPoint that you're going to see. But for example, here is the classic illustrated of the Iliad. And what's fun about this is it goes through pretty much the accurate set of the Trojan War that the Iliad represents. But you can have a lot of fun with this because almost everyone knows that the Iliad is about the Trojan War. So when you ask them the question, well, when did the war end? And that's with the Trojan horse, and then the Greeks destroy the city. But of course the Iliad does not cover that. It stops before they get to that point. The Trojan horse is in the early part of the Odyssey. Well, in this particular book, in this particular comic book, I should say, they end it properly, although they give you a little section on what happens in the end. So it is kind of fun to have something like that. They made over 168 different variations of this, and I have a few of them, but not enough. And of course, the Olympics, you can, anytime the Olympics comes up, you can do all sorts of things with the Olympics. Talk about the great legends of the Olympics. I did a whole series of podcasts on famous Olympians, and it's fun. So this was something that, it's a coloring book actually. So there's sticker books, there are coloring books. There's a never-ending amount of material that you can get for children on Greece. Now, one of the things we did, since Sherry and I had been to Greece so many times, is the lesson also included learning Greek. And we don't know a lot of Greek, but we can say hello, thank you very much, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a couple of other things. That's all you really needed to know. And so we taught Emma to say those. The special words were there at the beginning of each thing. You know, Kalimera, good morning. Kalispera, good evening. And so forth and so on. So we did reinforce that. So we start learning some language skills at this time. Another book is the See Inside series. This one happens to be on a city. They make them for the Acropolis. They make them for all of the other cities. So you can really find all sorts of things. Probably find these used. So that's one. I also had a book that I sent out, which is The Kid's Life in Ancient Greece. And so it gave a background of what it would have been like for a kid. And in some of the shows, some of the video, I should say, in some of the PowerPoints, I have pictures of toys that have been excavated. Dolls, little chariots, waggly head, pull toys. And so we always include those. We just try to, 6, 7-year-old, stay away from death as much as you possibly can, and it works out pretty well. So you can do that. And of course, the other thing is, Emma has been to our house many times, and she knows that I have all of this stuff. And she really likes it. We've been to the Renaissance festivals where we've all been dressed up as people from the Middle Ages, and I'll wear my chainmail and some of my helmets, and you've seen them in the background. Something that I forgot to point out when I did the introduction video. There are 4 helmets up on the top of the bookcases that go with this particular section. This one, of course, is the most famous. This is the Corinthian style helmet. And the Spartans would have used this, but other people used it in the Peloponnesus as well. What's amazing about this, and you'll see this when I do the little military section, is the difference this makes in the fearsome nature of the person wearing it. Because when I did the military thing with Emma, I did a picture of me in a toga, armed with a Greek spear, which would have been standard non-heavy infantry. Would have been the people throwing the slings and shooting arrows and doing other sort of things. Looked pretty wimpy. And then I put on my Leonidas shirt and this, and then took a picture. It's a complete change. It scared me even. So we have helmets that we will play with. And then this year, I bought something that I've been wanting for a long time. This is an authentic Greek sword from about 400 BC. I bought this from the Shadig Gallery, which is one of the few places that you can buy authentic material that hasn't been stolen out of a tomb somewhere. They've been doing it for a long period of time. When I get to the military, I'll show you what their catalogs look like and talk about this. So this is something that she hasn't seen yet because they moved out to Denver before I got that. But it's one of my prized possessions. And so we have that. So we're looking at some of the armor and other things. So let's get into on the Trojan War and Troy. Briefly, here's a real quick look at the books and objects I was talking about when I was holding them up that we used. The Olympic Games coloring book, Ancient Greek Towns look through, Kids' Life in Ancient Greece, which is really fun, Warriors and Seafarers. Now this will deal with the sea peoples, which supposedly destroy a lot of the civilizations at the end of the Bronze Age. And this last one is the archaeological kit that had the material on Mycenae and the Minoans and some other material. So that's a little nicer to look at. You get this stuff on Amazon. Well, here's the opening slide, like we see every time I do one of these. Emma working on her projects and some of the pictures from Troy. And then there's the words from the last lesson. And then these are the words that we're looking at during this lesson. Troy, Heinrich Schliemann, Agamemnon, Helen, Paris, Trojan Horse, and the Iliad. So that's our standard introduction. And of course the words would then be back at the end. Sherry and I have done a walking tour of the entire site of Troy, and you'll see some of the pictures in here. So if you're interested in a detailed walk through the site, then simply look for the traveling professors on the same area where you find this particular show as well. So we have to get a little bit of location. Now we've used a map before with Emma, so she's been the Knossos down here and Mycenae, and so we're up here at Troy. So we have a geographical background. Then we talk about the little body of water through there, which is the Hellespont. So here's a picture that Sherry and I took on our trip to Troy a few years ago. And then here is a map showing where Troy was located in relationship to that body of water. And you'll see there's a very large bay, little peninsula. There's the city, and you have the rivers that are flowing in. If you go there today, that's all silted up. It's solid land, which is one of the things that threw archaeologists off looking for it. Now we come to the hard part, but a part that if you've been doing your archaeology and talking about stratigraphy, you can bring that back in and it'll help this make sense. So here is a picture showing the various layers cut away on the hill at Hisarlik and shows the different cities, a problem that caused Schliemann all sorts of issues. So this gives you an idea of the layers. Talk about the people living in one place and building it up and building it up. Then here's a map showing all the different parts of the site today in different colors. So again, you talk about how this is so confusing. Then we back off and use this. Here's a picture showing the bay, which is why Troy is so important. This is the last bay before you start into the Hellespont up the Bosporus. When you have a storm, this is a very stormy area. This is the only place to get some rest, so they can make a fortune. The Greeks would have put their boats on the peninsula on the other side, and there you have the city. Now people will look at the site of Troy and go, wow, it's really tiny. They forget that that's a citadel. All ancient cities have a citadel or palace area, and then the city goes out. So this is a good job of showing the full size of the city. Then here we have a chart showing the excavations, because they excavated the palace first, and why is it so small? Then they excavated out and they found walls, they found wells, there are springs that are still on the site. So you expand it out, and then you show a little closer picture. Then we talked about how what we're going to be walking through is the top part up here, the citadel, but the city goes way out for long distances. Troy today, well, if you walk out away from the actual site to where the middle of the bay would have been, this is what you would see. It's called the Hill of Hyssaloch. And that would have been fortifications and other things. And then here is an aerial view, thanks to the postcard that they sell at the site, that shows the excavations of the citadel area. You see up down below, you can see the amphitheater, which is Roman. So there's a lot of the Roman section. There, one city's destroyed, another one's built on top of it, and then on top of it, and on top of it. Same is true at Knossos. The palace at Knossos was probably built over 8 times. So you start up here in this corner, and then you wind through the site, and you're literally going up and down in the different layers. And they have it really well marked, which I'll show you in just a minute. And here's the famous picture of Schliemann with his hat on and his jacket and his wife. He married a Greek woman. Would point out that the picture of his wife, she's actually wearing some of the treasure. And here's our tour group. Here's the guide. There I am. Everybody is either A-level teachers or university professors. And Sherry is obviously taking the picture. And we traveled around. They were a lot of fun to be with. Here we are at the beginning of our tour. Notice the sign on the left. It gives you a level. Troy 6 is the level of what's believed to be the Troy of the Iliad and the Odyssey. But notice the steps here. These are part of the wall that would have been the Alexandrian Hellenistic city, and then the Roman city that was built above it. But it's a good vantage point, and you do get a nice view. So here I'm standing up on the Roman level, looking out. This would have been completely covered with dirt, so it's all excavated down. And you can see this little valley right through here. That is what's called the Great Trench. But this is the outer wall, and then you see a major tower. So here's a shot showing the foundation of this massive tower, which is very typical of Bronze Age construction. You'll find this at Mycenae, you'll find it Hattusis in the Hittite area. And then here's an artist's rendition of what that tower would have looked like. Very impressive. And there are several areas where these would have been located. And then turning a little bit further, so there's the tower foundation, and then we're going to go up the slot, which is actually one of the gate entrance areas. Here we are heading into the gate area. Nice narrow spot, walls on both sides. And to give you some size, here I am standing next to the walls to make sure that you know that I was actually there. Now here is an artist's rendition of what that area that we're walking through would have looked like. Now we've climbed all the way to the top. And here is the viewing, would have been probably the main palace area. Looking straight out, this would have all been water. This would have been the bay, this little hill area, that would have been a peninsula. And the Greeks would have been on the other side of it. And then turning to a little bit to the right, you can see the Aegean Sea. If we could get higher, you could actually see the Helmspont because it's just on the other side of this right-hand side of the screen. But this would all have been a bay, and there's still rivers that flow into it. Now's where it really can get confusing because we're going to walk down into the site up there at the palace area of Troy 6, and we're going to go down to Troy 2. And as we're heading lower and lower, we start coming to this area where you have mud-dried brick. And it's built over Troy 1, and Troy 1 actually was a stone structure, but the people who took over after Troy 1 could not do that. So they made mud-dried bricks, and they have reproduced that to give you an idea of the wall and the structure as it would have looked like. And since they're mud-dried bricks, they're full of mud dauber nests. After you go through this area, you kind of get a grasp of what the architecture of the walls look like and the foundation. So as you go further through the town, you can kind of make that categorization that, oh, this is Troy 4, this is 1, here's 2, there's 6. So it does make sense, but it can be extremely confusing. Now we come to the Great Trench. This is the giant trench that Schliemann put right down through the middle of this pile of cities to kind of get an idea where the different levels were. It's something that was very commonly done at that particular time in the 1800s. It did it in the Middle East all the time. The trouble is, with as rich a site as this was, it damaged a lot of material, and he may have destroyed one of the most powerful towers. That would have been of Troy 6. But he's down on the level known as Troy 1. So here's Troy 1. And you can see it's a stone construction similar to the area where we walked through when we came into the site. Directly above this would have been that layer of mud-dried brick, and then we would have had more stone. Here's a artist's rendition of what Troy 1 would have looked like. A very, very small community with the palace area up there, very small palace area, and then a little town around it. This isn't like Troy 6, where literally this whole area would have been palace, and then the city would have expanded out. And here's a view looking at the area that would have been part of the palace region. Where this little green tree is growing, that is where Schliemann found the treasure hoard. Yeah, underneath some rocks here. So it's not a Troy 6 treasure. It's even earlier than that. It's Troy 1 probably. And then here's the great causeway that led up into the palace region. There I am standing next to it, doing my history according to Bob pointing out thing. And then this is an artist's view of what that city would have looked like from the causeway. What you would see is you would go up the causeway, and then you see the foundational area, which is rock. And then they would have had a stuccoed upper portion to it. So that's Troy 1. Here's some pictures of the Trojan Treasure. It kind of disappeared after World War II, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. The beautiful necklace, bracelet, gravy boat, beautiful earrings, and then a hairpin, and then the curly things are you curl your hair on those, so your head would be full of these little golden hair curlers. Well, here's a list of the travels of the Trojan Treasure. Found by Schliemann, smuggled out of Turkey to Germany. There it was put in the Charlottenburg Museum, and it stayed there until World War II broke out, because it's right next door to the Gestapo headquarters, so it was a target. So everything was boxed, microfilmed, and hidden everywhere. Well, then it disappears from 1945 to 1993. It was believed that the Russians had probably taken it, but eventually, during the cooling period at the end of the fall of the Soviet Union and the period of Gorbachev, there was a wonderful thawing. And during that process, they found the boxes with the treasure and notified the Germans that they had it. And they were opened, and they've been on display at the Pushkin Museum. There was a discussion that they would put them on a world tour. The concern was they might not come back, because it works like this. You notice it says in the World Court. This has still been going on for a long time period. The Schliemann family never donated it to the Charlottenburg Museum to keep it. So they sued to get possession back. Their descendants did. The German museum sued to get it back because it had been in their possession. The Russians basically are keeping it for war reparations for what the Germans did during World War II. So it is on display. The pictures that I showed you are from the guidebook that you could purchase when it was first put on display. So that's what happened to the Trojan Treasure. Oh, I might mention that the Turkish government believes that they should have it because it was stolen from them, because Schliemann signed a document giving them percentages of whatever he found. Here's another section of wall from Troy 6 on the side facing the bay, and this is what it would have looked like with the fortifications and the buildings above it and the street. So that's Troy 6. Here's a view of the Hellenistic city that the Greeks would have had on this particular site. Now I'm going to stand right up in here and look down. So here's the view from the site looking down into the valley into where the rest of the city would have been in the bay. Then here's a shot where I'm down at the other section below it looking up, and you can see the different types of wall construction. There's actually some older wall construction up above, and then you see the more modern Greek down here in this particular area. Now we walked away from the main palace fortification section, and you see this area goes out through these trees. That will take you down to one of the 3 springs that are on the site. Unfortunately, on a tour like this, we spent a lot of time on the site. There's not enough time for everything. So we did not get a chance to do that, but I did procure a picture from a postcard from the shop. But here is a chart showing the main spring area, and then this is a view of the walkway, the passageway down, but there are wells in different locations as well in the city. So the city had plenty of water. And here's the rendition of what the Roman city of Troy would have looked like. I would mention to you that when Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople, they originally thought about possibly putting it back on the site of Troy, but it just wasn't as defensible as Constantinople. So you notice right here the main feature other than the temple, and that is the amphitheater. And the amphitheater is still there. There's a little aerial view of it. Now, the amphitheater could probably also would be classified as an odeon, a place where you did business as well, where the organization of the city would meet and do their public meetings. And then you use it also for venue for artistry. So here's a view walking up to it, and then you have the steps. It's not very large. It would go up to the top. And there's a view from the top looking out. And of course, the Romans like a stage. They like props to go along with their plays. Now we've come all the way around the city and we've reached the last section. So moving off from the amphitheater, you look up the street, and this is all what is part of Troy 6. And then this is what it would have looked like from an artistic standpoint, with another fortification tower. And then here's a view going down the wall to the tower we saw when we began in that location. So again, this would have been the Citadel Fortress, and then you would have had the city out and around it. Now, I've spent more time giving you the background to this than I really spent with Emma. We would look at the walls and talk about a couple of things and find where the treasure was, so give her kind of a view, but I hate to take adults to a site like this without giving you a little more background. The same is true of these books. I have here the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, she had the comic book version of the Iliad, and so there were some things that she could page through and I could point out, or she could ask questions over, and then talked about the Odyssey a little bit, because actually that's where the Trojan horse actually comes in. But in the ancient world, there were 2 other books. There's a lot of stuff that happened in between the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you'll find that in the War at Troy by Quintus Smyrna, because the Amazons haven't arrived, various heroes haven't died yet, so forth and so on. And then, of course, the other book, the Aeneid, that was written by Virgil, and that was written on the request of Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Romans believed they were descendant from the Trojan hero Aeneas, who was allowed by the Greek gods to escape and ultimately to get vengeance for what happened to Troy. And that was the Roman excuse of why they were able to defeat these really incredible people. So you have those 4 books. There is an Iliad and the Odyssey, and the Aeneid is in a classic illustrated comic book. And I went to Amazon, and they do reprint them, but they're like $9.95 each. They're like graphic novels now. And then one last thing, the Trojan horse down here. That's something that you can climb up. The one that they used in the movie Troy is actually at the port that you come into when you cross the Bosporus heading in. And of course, the Trojan horse has always been a little bit of a discussion. For example, Poseidon, a very important defender of the Greeks, is also the god of earthquakes. There is a massive earthquake that strikes Troy 6. So was the Trojan horse, is Poseidon doing it? Then I have a picture here showing you another horse. This is a device used to knock walls down. That's used by the Assyrians and Hittites and many others. But it's called the wooden horse as well. He really enjoyed talking about how do you go to the bathroom while you're in there. So we had a good conversation. And then, of course, those are the words that we had from the lesson, coming back and looking at those. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it helped you a little bit. It's kind of odd to do this, but Emma had a good time with it. She loved going to these various places. Just wanted to make sure there were enough pictures of Nani and Bob to kind of keep her going. And she liked jewelry, so you added some of that stuff in. So we had a good time. So I hope this helps you out. I'll be doing the second part of the Greeks here pretty soon. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.